Arcade stick or gamepad? It's the age-old debate in the fighting game arena. I mean, you can get lost for a while if you just YouTube search which one's better. You'll get any opinion from front to back on why one's better than the other. What it tends to all boil down to is what have you spent the most time on? The reality of the situation is it's more about muscle memory. What are you able to interact with at a fast enough pace to be able to put out the moves, the abilities, the attacks that you want in the moment you need them? For me, for close to a decade of my gaming life, it was this, the DualShock 2 for the PlayStation 2. This was the controller I did everything on in gaming, at least when it came to console gaming. Now, I played heavily on the PC, mostly first-person shooters, action RPGs, specifically MMOs with my friends. But if I wanted to play a fighting game with my friends, I had to boot up the PlayStation 2 because I couldn't deal with it on a keyboard. It just wasn't my thing. However, I was able to play all these other games on PC, so it kind of balanced out. Eventually, I got my hand on a USB emulation item to get the PlayStation 2 controller to work on my PC, and I was able to start playing fighting games from that point forward. Recently, however, the lifespan of this controller seems to be hitting its mark. 2 decades, and some directions don't go in when I want them to. Buttons will get hit when I don't actually need them to be hit at that point in time. It's given me a great ride up till this point, but it's probably time I give it a burial at sea. This of course put me in the market for a new controller, and I came across the Hori FightPad, which seemed interesting. I liked the button setup on the right here, but other than that, the D-pad just started having issues. I started to notice that the directional input that I was able to achieve on the PlayStation 2 controller, I didn't seem to find anywhere else. When fighting games started coming out heavily on the Switch, it was the same way. The D-pad on the Switch controller just didn't feel right. Even on the Pro controller, it never seemed to respond exactly how I wanted it to. Now, this is just years of muscle memory getting built up for one controller that I can't find an equivalent to. So when John approached me with an idea of trying out an arcade stick, it was a little bit off until I saw what he was asking me to attempt. What you're seeing here is the Mixbox arcade stick. Now, you've probably noticed right away that that's not an actual stick on the left there. Those are WASD keys from a keyboard. I know, it threw me off too. But since I was having problems maintaining good directional input control on any of the other gamepads that I had, I really wanted to give this a shot. Reason being, with how much I played first-person shooters, with how much I played action RPGs, and with their heavy reliance on WASD keys, maybe this hand had a lot more knowledge in it than I thought when it comes to the WASD layout. I mean, for games like that, I have a comparable 2 decades worth of gaming alongside the PlayStation 2 controller. So really, the switch was from thumb to 2 to 3 fingers. I gotta say, those 2 decades definitely paid off. I can confirm now that my ability to pick up this fight stick, or maybe I should say hitbox, either way, I was able to pick this up with ease. My control confidence in fighting games maintained a peak level of performance. That's not common when you pick up a new controller. I was able to respond quickly and efficiently in any fighting game that I threw myself into. The developers of this thing call it a Mixbox, and it's probably the best thing for it. It takes the idea of a hitbox being for very specific inputs at very specific times and gives it a new button layout at home with keyboard-based gamers. And for me, it works. It works well. It's the layout that seems to be the core of this. The developer reached out to me to let me know what their driving force behind the design was. It's based on how a keyboard's laid out. You can see we have the WASD keys here, and normally in a fighting game, people will usually bind 8 keys to the right of it to be any of the inputs. It's sort of a pseudo fight stick layout, and to translate this, the hitbox took the move input keys and kept them as the same as you'd expect on a normal arcade stick. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with that. They tend to be very ergonomic, very easy for the hands to hit. And then they lined up the WASD format just a little bit over from where they are, but perfectly in line with it, to be equivalent to how a keyboard feels. They even gave the WASD keys a little bit of an angle to allow them to feel kind of how a keyboard does when your hand's laying on it just right. The only personal gripe I've had with this is something I have for normal fight sticks. It tends to be hard for me to find where they need to be positioned away from me to be comfortable. This distance here between the actual inputs and the WASD, it's a little narrow, so if I have it too close to me, the act of keeping my arms kind of T-Rexed together like that, it gets very uncomfortable over time, but after a little bit, I found a better positioning for it, basically on the end of my knees, to allow easy control with no problems and no overtime stress added. So I'm guessing the next thought on your mind is the Mixbox for me? Will it make me Sonic Fox? Will I be at the top tier of any game I play? No. Well, not necessarily. The core of the controller arms race tends to boil down to one thing. Does it give you the fastest response time in the most comfortable way? If you want to pull off ridiculous combos without needing to really think about what you need to hit, you need to find ways to naturalize the movement in your hands to something you can just do. Taking the idea of down, down, forward, forward, punch, from your head and just going Hadouken and having it happen. There are several versions of the stick. The one we were sent was PlayStation 3/4 and PC compatible. Considering recently I've been buying a bunch of fighting games on the Switch, I still wanted to see how it worked out there. So what do? Well, there's a pretty big market of USB adapters meant to convert controllers to the use on another system. Now for the Switch, the Mayflash tended to be the one that kept popping up, and it simply stated it will convert PlayStation 3 and 4 controllers over to work on the Switch. That's pretty much all I read. That was everything online. Bought it, and no. No, it turns out there's actually more of a compatibility list than just, it works. And you could actually email these companies to see if a stick or controller you want to buy will work on their system. So you might want to check that ahead of time so you're not about $40 out with something that you can't really use. Looking into it though, this stick uses something called a Brook board. Now, like Mayflash, it's a brand that tends to be in a unified structure for itself, in a sort of sealed off way to try to minimize any kind of latency issues or something along the lines of incompatibilities. And Brook makes a USB adapter. In my time of playing it in BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle as well as Street Fighter 30th Anniversary, I saw no real lag, no input issues at all. And even in Street Fighter 30th, a game that I reviewed and specifically talked about how bad the inputs felt on the original controllers as well as the Pro controllers, I found myself being able to pull out moves and abilities and even combos at a more effective pace than any of those other controllers with this Mixbox. Clearly, it's just a better match for me as a controller. Now, one thing that really interests me about the Fight Stick community is the level of customization you can bring to even pre-built sticks. Back when John and I built some cardboard fight sticks to test it out with some interesting parts we got, we came across the idea that a lot of the buttons aren't kind of the end-all be-all. You can actually adjust the buttons even further than what the main manufacturing company gives you, changing out the switches themselves, adding springs to decrease sensitivity. And to my understanding, the fight stick shell that the Mixbox is in is fairly standardized. It's not like it's completely custom, and since the buttons themselves tend to have a standardization that goes across the entirety of the parts development industry, I thought that it would be interesting to note that if you're not that into the Sanwa buttons, the whole glossed over, very high sensitivity button type, it's not hard to change. You can add springs, you can even switch over to the Hori matte buttons. It just tends to be based around preference. People usually prefer the gloss because there's a level of stick to it when you release your finger from it that'll actually pull the button back up. People tend to like that, although Hori has moved forward with their matte approach with most of their new sticks. So coming from the world of custom-built PCs, a place where you change stuff if you don't like it, where you can add or subtract things based on what you need at the time, it sort of brings the arcade stick into the realm of what I know and love about gaming, making it your own. Now from opening this, the one worry that I really have are these mechanical keys. They're simply mechanical switches, cherry switches to my understanding, and as you can see they're all individually placed in here. Now the thing is, I don't know how easy it is to replace these. Once they start to wear out, which does actually happen for mechanical keyboards, how do I get new ones? These people who are making this aren't exactly a major company, but am I able to order from them what's going on here? Do I need to figure out how to modify a cherry switch to replace into this? I'm not too sure on the whole specifics of that. Like, is there going to be a time limit for how long I can enjoy using this arcade box stick Mixbox craziness, which is actually helping me in fighting games, before I have to figure out how to use a stick itself? Hopefully, as I look into it a little further, I'll find that it's a little easier than I maybe originally expected it to be, but we'll have to see as time goes on. So that's the Mixbox, my official entry into the pseudo fight stick life. It had me wondering though, how accessible is this to the competitive world? I emailed someone over at EVO 2018 because I was worried that this might not be usable at that or any other competitive event, and as far as I can tell, It doesn't matter what you're using as long as it doesn't have macro function. This does not have macro function built in. As far as I can tell, there's no way to set that up easily. This was proven back in EVO 2016 by a player known as Gono, who decided a Rock Band electronic keyboard was going to be his controller of choice at the events. He was winning a bit, he didn't exactly win the whole thing, but it was his controller of preference. So the Mixbox does have an easy approach to this. Hell, you could probably rebind controls on an actual Rock Band guitar and maybe get in there with that. And that all comes back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's not what you're using. There is no definitive high end. It's just what you're most used to. If you've given your all, if you've given 10, 20 years into one type of controller, do you really want to stop and try something else? Do you really want to give up all of that muscle memory, all of that work in order to play anything else? Sure, some of the top Street Fighter players and even fighting game players in the world use arcade sticks, but how many of them went for most of their life to actual arcades, to play on actual arcade sticks, on actual arcade systems? That's the reality of it. It's just how much time you've spent, and I've spent 2 decades on a keyboard. This is working for me. Well, thanks for watching, and as a fan of fighting games in general, if you have any stories of your own you'd like to drop down in the comments section of how you kind of found your controller of choice, let people know. Let others know that it's not just about arcade stick only. It's not just about, well, FightPad has these functions which make it better. It's about what you use. Let us know all about that. And until next time, I've got some Street Fighter V to play, so I'll see you in the ring. It is ridiculously hot out. Thanks for watching. Don't forget there's thumbs somewhere down there. You can click them. Maybe they'll do something. Who knows with YouTube anymore. And don't forget to check out some of the videos over there. John will probably have them up. And hopefully, you know, I'll put the actual merch link below. Oh, who's on puppers? Who's on the old puppers? Oh, big yawn.